Hello, my name is Colby Richardson, and welcome to today's webinar, The Straight Scoop on Integrated Planning. We're going to get started in just 1 minute. Thank you so much for your patience. Hello, everyone. Thank you for your patience. Welcome to today's webinar. Before we get started, I wanted to review a few housekeeping items. Audio is available through your computer's mic and speakers or by telephone. Your call-in number and access code are in the control panel box on the right-hand side of your screen. All attendees have been muted to minimize background noise. If you have a question during the webinar, please type it into the questions box on the upper right-hand side of your screen. We will have a dedicated time to answer questions at the end of the webinar. And if you are experiencing any technical difficulties, please contact us via the questions box and we'll try to troubleshoot the issues. And now I'd like to introduce a surprise special guest, Andrew D. Sawyers. Andrew is the Director of the Office of Wastewater Management at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency in Washington, D.C. He oversees the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System program, which governs municipal and industrial discharges into U.S. surface waters. At the EPA, Andrew is responsible for multiple technical and financial assistance tools, including the Clean Water State Revolving Fund and the Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act. He has previous experience managing clean water and drinking water funding programs, and he has a PhD from Johns Hopkins University in geography and environmental engineering. Thanks for joining us, Andrew.
I was listening to the introduction. I think you guys give me a lot more credit than I actually do deserve. But this is such an important topic for us. And when Robyn and the team asked if I could participate, I gladly, decided to do so. I think it's really important for us to talk a bit about integrated planning. Again, thanks to, I'm not exactly sure how many folks are on. I think the registration suggested somewhere close to 300, 400, 700. Wow, that's great. And so I'm happy to hear about the interest in integrated planning, and really happy to provide just some overview, some welcoming remarks. Our team internally here at EPA and with the regions have been working diligently at this. Just a little bit of background, and I suspect Robyn and others will discuss this in more detail, but January of last year, the president actually signed what was then called the Water Infrastructure Innovation Act, WIIA, and as a part of that, the Integrated Planning Bill became authorized, essentially became a regulation for us, and there were some commitments, many commitments in there for us and others, and in part, one of the key things within the Integrated Planning Bill was for us to focus on working with stakeholders across the country to ensure that they were aware that this indeed was now a regulatory instrument and some of the opportunities that are associated with that. So this is one of our first webinars. I think we have had a few others, but this is one of the key ones that we want to share with you some of the things that we have been working on, but perhaps importantly, once it has been finalized, once the webinar is completed, we want to make sure that to the extent there are communities across the country that have an interest in building out their integrated planning component, if you will, or work plan, and to the extent there is interest in actually moving that towards a permit, we would certainly appreciate having those conversations, and we'll be happy to help you with those transactions. I think a little bit later today, you'll have some updates from Kansas, I think, and Virginia. I'm very familiar with both programs, actually, with Tom in Kansas and Grace in Virginia, and I think they're doing some wonderful work. And our hope is that while they share their experience, we'll have provide for some of us who are thinking about exactly how this will work. You will, at least through both Grace and Tom, the perspective, if you will help you to identify what options might be available to you going forward. Just quickly, in terms of a little bit of what has happened over the last year, I don't want to get into the details because I think others will do a much better job. But we hired Robyn, which Robyn hopefully introduced herself earlier. Robyn came to us from another office, and she brings a wealth of experience to this effort. I think her record says 10 years. I thought you were actually with EPA much longer. But she brings a wealth of experience. She has worked a lot with state and local government and utilities, trying to build innovative solutions to address some of our needy environmental issues. Within OW, we're working to complete, at least in the process of building out a report to Congress, and it's due January 2021. And within that report, we actually have a list of some of the initial plans, integrated plans. And it's on our website. To the extent there are plans, if you are reviewing the website, there are plans that you are aware of that is not there, we would be happy to get that information so we can actually post those plans. And so along with the plans, you have some FAQs and case studies and an overview of the WIIA legislation. Another key area that we're focusing on is this idea of concept of hiring a municipal ombudsman. This was really important to many of the stakeholders that were critical in pushing the integrated planning bill. And the concept behind the municipal ombudsman was to have sort of an independent stakeholder, if you will, someone who would be able to represent the interests of munis across the country, as well as had a decent understanding of what the agency rules, regs, and commitments were. And so I think we're very close to at least hiring an interim position. That position closed a few weeks back within the agency, and I think a decision has been made, and then ultimately we will get someone permanently in that position. But I think this is going to be really important, this role, if you will. My office will be providing some support. OCIR within the agency will be doing the same, as well as the Office of Enforcement, Compliance, and Assurance. That's a week supporting this position. So again, that was just a sort of a quick summary of some of the things that we're working through, and I'm going to turn it back to Robyn to sort of work through some of as I think what I saw earlier, the scoop on integrated planning. I thought it was a very interesting sort of a heading, if you will, because it's really, I think, an important concept, if you will, that could help many communities across the country to address their wastewater obligations. I look forward to hearing the details and moving forward with this. So thank you all.
Great.
Thanks, Andrew. Really appreciate that. Robyn, I'm now going to turn things over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. You might hear some fire engine in the background. It's getting hot in here, so we're going to get to the straight scoop. And I want to thank you, Andrew, for being with us today, because I really appreciate your time. Thank you. So, hi, everyone. This is Robyn DeYoung with the Office of Water. And when I was developing my presentation, I had a choice between two things. It was, one, reading through the highlights of the Water Infrastructure Improvement Act provisions, or I could dispel some of the common myths that have come up in the various conversations that we've had across the country. So I decided to do the latter. And you're going to see a slide that has the first myth that we've heard, so let's just jump right into it. Myth number 1 is integrated planning is now a requirement and EPA or a state permitting authority must approve a plan. Myth. The reality is that integrated planning, that in accordance with the 2012 integrated municipal stormwater and wastewater planning approach, has and continues to be a voluntary approach. So no one is required to develop a plan. And at the same time, EPA or states are not required to approve a municipality's plan. Now, what would happen is EPA or a state permitting authority would sit down with the municipality and determine what elements of a plan could be translated into a permit or an enforcement action. Some people say that now I have an approved plan, but that's not a step that needs to be taken. All it is you decide what parts of the plan get put into a permit terms and conditions, and there is no step that approves the plan. However, there are some states and municipalities I've seen create an MOU, a memorandum of understanding between the parties so that there's an agreement of the contents of the plan. So that is an option if you so choose to take that option. Moving to myth number 2. Integrated planning is only used to extend compliance periods for the Clean Water Act enforcement action. Well, the reality is that it's true that some municipalities have developed an integrated wastewater stormwater plan to solve combined sewer overflow compliance obligations. However, there are a number of municipalities that are using integrated planning for other reasons. They want to look holistically at protecting their watershed. Maybe they want to look at innovative solutions like green infrastructure and putting them into a permit. It's most important that when doing integrated planning, you're always thinking about complying with the Clean Water Act. So there is nothing in the law or in integrated planning that relieves a permittee of any permit obligation or Clean Water Act requirement. And you'll notice in the handout section of the webcast that there is a preliminary list of integrated plans, and you can also find it on our website. You can pull that and you can get a number of different examples of reasons why and how municipalities have looked holistically at solving their Clean Water Act issues using integrated planning. And you'll hear some speakers to talk about it next too. Now, some people have asked, well, what is exactly in an integrated plan? And we have 6 elements here. And it's big picture on purpose because each integrated plan is going to look different depending on the community and its unique needs. So you have these 6 elements, and the first element, you want to look across water quality, human health challenges and goals and find out, where are your water quality impairments? What are they? When do they happen? What are the drivers? And then also think about the other community goals that you all want to achieve. The second element is about understanding your system and the state of your infrastructure. You really need to know where all your assets are. Element 3 is a very critical piece because it's about communicating with your stakeholders. Highly recommend getting meaningful public engagement and dialogue early on and often throughout the process because that will really help with buy-in down the road. Then the fourth element is how to evaluate and prioritize all of your options based on a set of criteria. And this analytical piece is important to show how you're sequencing the highest priority and most beneficial projects first. And there's a lot that goes into this to really think about what this looks like over time. And then the fifth element is about metrics and how you measure success over time and demonstrate improvements. And then the sixth element is about adaptive management. What are you going to do when things change? Inevitably, life will throw you a curveball, and you just need to know, how are we going to make improvements to the plan, change the plan, amend things when those situations arise? So you have a direct link to our integrated municipal stormwater and wastewater planning approach framework document down below. So feel free to click on that, and you'll get to it within one click. Imagine that. Easy, easy, easy. So the third myth, before we move on to our next speaker, we have one more myth that I think is important to dispel, and that is the Water Infrastructure and Improvement Act, WIIA, added new flexibilities that didn't exist before under the Clean Water Act. And I apologize for any background noise. It's slowly dissipating. And the reality is that the Water Infrastructure and Improvement Act has not added any new flexibilities that didn't exist before under the Clean Water Act. What it has done is it's codified our integrated planning approach into law. And it does require us at EPA to inform municipalities of the opportunity to develop and incorporate all or parts of integrated plans and permits or consent decrees or administrative orders. And we have a number of memos that we've instructed staff across EPA to do that. And in the handout section, you'll see our December 3rd memo that was written to our regional division, water division directors, asking them to contact all the needed parties. And we also have a number of resources on our website that talk a little bit more related to enforcement matters as well. There was another memo on September 26th of 2019 talking about how there needs to be a discussion about integrated planning with anyone that's currently in an enforcement action. So what's nice about WIIA is that now integrated plans are codified under Section 402 of the Clean Water Act, and that creates greater certainty. Green infrastructure is also defined under WIIA, which also means that there's greater certainty in using green infrastructure to meet Clean Water Act requirements. So we've been embracing this for a long time, and we're really happy to see that WIIA has recognized this as a meaningful solution. And lastly, here are some new resources. We've updated our webpage, so please go there and you can get a lot of new information. The memos, internal memos between headquarters and regional directors. You can get that preliminary list of integrated plans. It's also in your handout here. We have FAQs, some case studies from our technical assistants, and the municipal ombudsman position will be selected very soon, as Andrew has said. And we're really busy writing our report to Congress that will be due January 2021. So if you want your integrated plan to be a part of that report to Congress, then definitely contact me and send me an electric document of that. And we're also always looking to do future technical assistance to streamline both for states and municipalities on how to incorporate integrated planning into permits. All right, so that is my presentation, and you can contact me here. This is my contact information. And now and we have a disclaimer that you can read, just to let you know that other presenters are not the viewpoint of the agency. But we're really happy to have Grace and Tom with us today. I'm now going to turn it over to Colby, our moderator, for a poll question.
Thanks, Robyn. Really appreciate it. We're just going to launch two short poll questions here. The first poll question is, how many people are viewing this webcast? And I'll give you about 20 seconds to complete the poll question. Great. Thank you, everyone, for participating in that. And now I'm going to launch our second poll question. The question is, which of the 6 elements would you like more informational resources from EPA? And I'll give you about 20 seconds to complete it. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for answering the poll question. And now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Grace LeRose. Grace is the Program Manager for Water Quality Compliance for the City of Richmond, Virginia, Department of Public Utilities. She worked on the effort to obtain the first in Virginia integrated permit for the city, a unique stakeholder-driven and data-intensive project. She has been involved in the clean water field for 29 years as a laboratory analyst, compliance officer, and as a water quality specialist. She focuses on the interconnectedness of wastewater, stormwater, and combined sewer systems, and Grace earned a BS in chemistry from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Thank you for joining us, Grace, and I will share your screen now.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. Grace, could you just briefly go to display settings and click the first option?
There we go. Is that better?
Perfect.
Okay. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome, and I'm happy to be going first. We completed our project in October of 2018 with an integrated permit, and I'm going to try and give you a somewhat abbreviated version of how we got there and why we got there. First, a little bit about Richmond. We are the capital city of Virginia, located on the James River, which is one of the tributaries of the Chesapeake Bay. We're about midway between the Blue Ridge Mountains and the bay itself, located right along a Piedmont. That section of the James River that flows north and south is actually on the separation. So we're sort of between two geographical descriptions. All of our city is fed by gravity to our wastewater plant, located on the southern portion of the city. Richmond is an old city, founded in the 1700s, incorporated as a city. The capital of Virginia, designed by Thomas Jefferson, is here. Some of you may have heard we had a few visitors yesterday. We're very happy everything went very peacefully, and glad to welcome anybody and everybody to Richmond. We have 20 distinct watersheds outlined on this map. A third of our city, predominantly the older and historic and downtown areas, are combined sewer, and the rest are separated sewers. We like to say that Richmond is a big city with southern charm. We don't have a lot of traffic. We have a vibrant food scene, a lot of art here, and a lot of good things to come and visit. So if anybody would like to come and visit, we welcome you. Our population as of 2018 was a little over 225,000. Sources of income for those folks are healthcare. We're a southern city transitioning from a tobacco manufacture and trade, with the headquarters of Philip Morris being here, to more of a tech-focused economy, banking, and tourism. So there's a lot of factors focusing on Richmond as the capital city. Some of the drivers for us to consider integrated planning, again, that aging infrastructure that we have to both maintain and improve. Our wastewater plant was built in 1958 and has been upgraded most recently last year to treat both stormwater and combined wastewater. We are a city with slightly less than 30% poverty rate, historic environmental injustice. The reason most of our combined sewer is in a part of the city that was historically black. So the wastewater was piped to that neighborhood and then out into the river in their neighborhood. So we have historical legacy issues to deal with that involve both race and environmental justice. Our spending, however, has not been reflective of the struggles that Richmond has experienced. We are under a special order by consent for our combined system. We are one of 3 communities in Virginia that has a combined system, the other 2 being Lynchburg and Alexandria. We have been under a consent order since 1988, I believe, and have consistently invested in our combined system by separating, by putting in holding tanks, bigger pipes. The usual, we've spent between 1988 and today roughly around $300 million, with a capture rate of about 90% since the beginning of our project. That still does not get us to compliance with water quality standards in downtown. And we were looking at spending probably 500 to 700 million to bring that part of the river in compliance with water quality standards, mostly for bacteria. On top of that, we had the Chesapeake Bay TMDL to manage in the last few years since it went into our permit. The TMDL was signed in 2010 and became part of our MS4 permit in 2013. So those investments to meet the TMDL were staring us in the face as well. And that was anywhere from 150 to 300 million on top of the 300 we had already spent and the 500 coming up for CSS. So there was a lot of light at the end of the tunnel, as they say, and it was a train headed right for us. So trying to keep affordability for ratepayers in part of the mix of our equation was always at the forefront of what we were thinking. So I have to give credit where it is due. It was Bob Stiles, who was our utility director in 2011, 2012, who said, we need to think differently about how we do things, and we need to look at integrated planning to help us find our way out of this. And he wanted to do it voluntarily instead of essentially waiting for us to get another consent agreement, forcing us to do something. So we partnered with some folks and put our heads together and said, can we move forward? What's that going to look like for us? So some of the challenges that would prevent us from being successful at doing this was a legacy of distrust. Utilities did not have a good relationship with any community groups. Like I said, mostly when we would go to community groups, we would be harangued for high rates, not fixing, potholes, all the usual list of complaints. We had tried to do a stream restoration as part of our TMDL compliance, and it just happened to be during the 2016 election, and all the mayoral candidates got involved, and there was just a groundswell of opposition to a stream restoration, which was shocking to say the least. But if anybody wants a good read, just Google Reedy Creek Stream Restoration and you'll be amazed. It was an eye-opener for me, and it just was a complete, it just blew up in our face. There's no other way to say it. I did mention the environmental injustice aspect of historic environmental injustice, meaning that our CSOs were in poor and Black neighborhoods. Coupled that with our population and poverty level, it just seemed like it was not going to happen. But what we our goal was to do it anyway. And we went to our state agency, Department of Environmental Quality, or DEQ, and said, we want to do this. Will you support it? And I will give them credit. They were very supportive from the beginning. What they asked us to do is be transparent and to not have any surprises. So in other words, to get all the conflict out before the permit went in front of them. And we thought we could do that, so we went forward. I'm glad Robyn talked a little bit about EPA's framework, because what we did was we sort of picked parts of integrated planning and parts of integrated watershed management and merged them together in a way that works for us. So what we decided was we needed to have stakeholder involvement from the beginning, because it wouldn't work to go in front of the community and say, here's what we know about our watersheds, here's what we think are the strategies, now we're going to tell you what it is and we want you to buy into it. We decided that we would do it the other way, that we would bring in folks who understood or who wanted to understand the technical issues behind all these decisions, who knew about modeling, who knew about water quality standards, who knew about what the issues were with the combined system, and were willing to learn with us and be part of this process. And this is a very new approach for utilities. Normally, I will say engineers are not known for their openness and willing to take participation, and it was very disconcerting to a lot of people to have that all laid open and say, we're willing to be a partner in this. Mm-hmm. So the way we took those strategies was to layer stakeholder involvement from the beginning. That is really the takeaway from this slide. So we tried to have what we call technical stakeholders, or people who understand the data behind it. And we wanted to communicate with them in a way that was very transparent and very consistent. So what we decided to do was incorporate a neutral facilitator. And this is a program out of the University of Virginia called the Institute for Environmental Negotiation, or IEN. And they have a lot of experience negotiating natural resource conflicts. They were born out of the forestry conflicts out of the Shenandoah Valley, where a lot of landholders and people who wanted to protect trees and forests were always at odds with each other. But they have since expanded into every other environmental issue, including environmental justice. And they have a specific way for interaction with environmental conflicts, which was completely different from the way we did things. So we had to learn at the same time. So we asked them to partner with us and help us develop a system that all of our stakeholders would be okay with. And I have to say, I think this was the game changer for us, because it wasn't us as the experts going in front of a group of citizens or even regulators and saying, here's what we think is the best way forward. Do you buy it or do you not? What can we do to get you to buy our product? What we went to them with was, here's the data. We still collected data. We still had monitoring data. We still had modeling data. We still had land use data. We still had GIS data. But when all of that was done, and all of this, like I say, was transparent, they had access to everything using our website, RVAH2O. What we then said to them was, now what do we do? So part of those stakeholders, you can see, came from a lot of different angles. So we had people who just were recreationists. They wanted to come and kayak down the river. That's all they cared about. We had the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, who was concerned about what's the effect of pollutants on the bay. We had the health department, who was concerned about drinking water. We had the universities, University of Richmond and the Virginia Commonwealth University were also stakeholders along the way. So we had neighboring jurisdictions participate as well. So we think we threw a pretty wide net and got just about everybody who wanted to be partners to it. So the way we looked at it was this way. First, we have to have the technical piece. We had to do the modeling of what would it take to meet water quality standards in each of these watersheds and in the river, finally. How do we communicate that information? And then how do we have coordination between the stakeholders? And then somewhere between all these three things, technical, coordination, and communication, there's the permit covers all three of those things. So what we ended up with was, the first part of it was the data collection, and that ended up in a watershed characterization report. So we went through not the 20 watersheds, we grouped them by likeness. So for instance, all the CSO watersheds north of the river were grouped together. The other separate storm sewer watersheds north of the river were grouped together. So we ended up with what we called 4 watersheds, north, south, east, and west. And were they combined or were they separate? And then we characterized those by pollutant loads using land use and impervious surface and all of that. If anybody wants to find a copy of this, this is again all on our RVA H2O website under planning. After the end of the process was done and we had chosen all our strategies and goals, we produced what we called a clean water plan, and then we applied for our permit. So that was our process: watershed characterization, going through the steps of the clean water plan, applying for the permit. So the way that it actually worked was, we set a series of goals, again, all decided by stakeholder involvement, and they voted on them. They ranked them by points. They ranked them by importance, and then we chose strategies to achieve those goals. And I'll have a slide on this next time, or next. But the way we chose our strategies, this funnel sort of illustrates it, because people came up with a lot of strategies. Some applied and some had no weight at all. For instance, a lot of people care a lot about invasive plants. So they don't really affect water quality. They didn't have any pollution removing points, but they were high in votes. So we included them. we said, fine, they go. They're not going to be a priority because they don't improve water quality. So anyway, you'll see all that in a minute. So you had all our strategies. We applied a feasibility test to them. We talked about, were they permit or regulatory drivers? Were there other metrics? Was it something that was possible on city property, or did it have to be private property? And then finally was cost. Can we afford to do this? And then what we ended up with was our prioritized strategies. So here are the goals that were chosen by the stakeholders and our strategies for achieving those goals. So reducing pollution and stormwater peak flows was our first goal. Restoring habitat. They wanted to continue the stakeholder engagement process even after the permit was issued, which we agreed to. They want land conservation. They wanted to continue to work with us as partners. They wanted us to conserve water. They wanted to improve access to recreation, and they wanted to see further monitoring. So the strategies to achieve those goals, as selected by the stakeholders, were to, and there are metrics with each of these, to have riparian buffers, to have green infrastructure in both the separate area and combined area. And this is an example of where you get more with an integrated plan than you would with separate MS4 and combined areas. Because if we were only looking at the combined area or the MS4, we would say we're going to put all our green infrastructure in the MS4 because we get credit for that on our TMDL. Here it doesn't matter because we meet compliance other ways. So we can put green infrastructure in the combined area for not having to worry about getting credit for it. Oddly enough, they wanted to do stream restoration. Native and invasive species, they wanted to promote the use of native species and have us remove invasive species. They wanted, hold on a minute. They wanted us to plant more trees. They again wanted us to conserve land, reduce potable water, and look for further pollution and improve the combined system infrastructure. So this is a sort of a screenshot of how we ranked things, how we arrived at the metrics, and how each strategy and each goal achieved them. And again, you can read all of this in our website, which tells you how we ranked everything, excuse me, and how we got to choosing these. But after we were done, we went back and say, all right, the strategies we chose to achieve these goals, how do they meet each of the goals that we said was important? So for instance, you'll see nitrogen reduction, reduce nitrogen to the TMDL. Well, that doesn't do anything for natives and invasive. It doesn't do anything for land conservation. It doesn't do anything for water conservation. But the other 10 goals, yeah, it touches all of those. It's pollution reduction. It could be stream restoration. It could be green infrastructure. And it would be restoring riparian areas. And again, for all of the pieces to work, we had to have everything there. Feasibility for us would be to work on a project that we have control over. So we only looked at, for instance, on riparian areas, putting riparian areas on either property that we own or parks own. So if there was a stream on a private property that could benefit from a riparian buffer, but we didn't own it, that would not be considered. And that's just, again, a feasibility. Is it a good idea? Yes. But we don't have control over that property, so we score them lower. So the outcome of this whole process was that in the end, we agreed, we had consensus on our goals. and our strategies. So we could go back to our partner DEQ and say, we've walked through all of these with all of these stakeholders. We're ready to have the permit issued. We laid out how we wanted the permit laid out, and we're all in agreement on this. And that was a big deal for DEQ. That's what they wanted to see at the end, that there these conflicts that people have talked about integrated planning, we addressed in the process. And I will say, we had one meeting where we put all of our loads in one chart. So whether it was combined or wastewater or MS4, we listed out what the bacteria load was, what the nitrogen load was, what the sediment load was, what the phosphorus load was. And we said, this is what our allocation is, and this is what we achieve right now. And I can tell you that some of the environmental groups who were stakeholders at that time, I could see the wheels turning in their brains, and they were thinking, well, this shows they're in compliance because they're using how good their wastewater plan is to achieve compliance on the stormwater side, because the loads were joined. And we said, yes, it does show that, but here's what we have stated. We are going to continue to work on our clean water plan. We are going to continue to put green infrastructure in the combined area and in the separate area. We're going to continue to address stormwater, not because we have to, but because we want to improve our own watersheds, our own neighborhoods. That's the driver for us now. We've met compliance, but we're going to keep going. And because we had been truthful with them from the beginning, I think that they were accepting of our position. So I think they were, I don't want to say worried, but I think it concerned them. And I think they wanted that question answered, and I think we answered it as best as we could. We're going to keep going. We also, I think, were able to earn some goodwill. I think we hadn't done a very good job about explaining what we had spent $300 million on, improving the combined system, because I think we were afraid to even talk about it, to be honest. But I think once we explained to people what we had done, they were very supportive. And they were pleasantly surprised, I have to say. So I think that was a win for us as well, understanding what we do and how we are always continuing to try to do better. So how long did all this take? We started really in November of 2013, and we took almost an entire year to do that watershed characterization. So that took a big chunk of our time. Shortly after that was finished, we started in on our clean water plan and sifting through what our goals would be and our strategies would be. And that took probably another year and a half. And we wanted to have the draft VPDES ready by mid-2017, and we made that. We wanted DEQ to have a good chunk of time to chew it over on their side and work through any issues on what they wanted. And then the permit was issued in 2018, the first in the Commonwealth. So we were very proud of that. Since that time, what we've been working on, we've been working on implementing our plan, following the metrics. One of our partners came to us and said, we're going to get $1 million grant from the National Fish and Wildlife Federation to do Green Master Plan in the priority watersheds. Do you want to partner? And we said yes. And that process begins in the next few weeks, and will go on for the next 3 years. at the end of which we'll have a green infrastructure master plan for our 3 main combined watersheds. In December of 2018, we began a technology study in our combined system using technology provided by EmNet, where we actually look at the flows and how much is released during a combined event. And we have some really good information there, which will inform our operation of the plant and help us to better utilize existing infrastructure that we do have already without building more. And then finally, our third big project this year is another upgrade to the wastewater plant to move us. We are 45 MGD dry weather flow. Wet weather flow currently is 75. Any day now, we should go to 140 MGD, which should bring us to capture of about 92-ish% of our combined flow. So we're excited about that. We're getting close, and we just are going to have to figure out the last bit of it going forward and re-looking at our long-term control plan. I just have a few slides on implementation if anybody is interested, how we did what we did. With our priority watersheds were ranked on water quality impairments, either impervious area or bacteria loads, and again, how much property was controlled by DPU or parks, and were there already projects there. So for instance, if DPW is redoing a street, putting in a bike lane, we would come along and say, hey, let's make this a greener bike lane. Let's put in permeable pavers or something like that. So we didn't want to start fresh everywhere. We wanted to add what we could to an existing project.
Hi, Grace. So sorry to interrupt, yes, but for time reasons, could we please speed up the presentation? Thank you so much.
Sure. I'll just go through these real quickly. This is one of our projects, Pocasham Stream Restoration. We're going to be doing some green infrastructure at the library. This is that bike path we were talking about. And we did some work at one of our historic parks, Monroe Park on VCU campus. And here's how we are communicating again using our website and our dashboard where you can see water quality monitoring. And that should be it. So I'm done.
Great. Thank you so much, Grace. Really appreciate it. Now I'd like to administer just one last poll question. The poll question is, where are you currently in the integrated planning process? And I'll give you about 20 seconds to complete. Thank you, everyone, for answering the poll question. And now I'd like to introduce our last speaker of today, Tom Stiles. Tom is the Director of the Bureau of Water at KDHE, overseeing the public water supply, underground injection control, MPDES permitting, TMDL, water quality standards, and monitoring programs for the state of Kansas. Prior to his stint at KDHE, he spent 16 years with the Kansas Water Office as a hydrologist and assistant director, where he established the minimum stream flow and water assurance programs and oversaw development of the Kansas Water Plan. Tom serves on the board of directors for the Association of Clean Water Administrators, as well as acting as co-chair of its permitting and compliance committee. He is a past chairman of the Interstate Council on Water Policy and the Western States Water Council Water Quality Committee. Tom received his BS in Watershed Science at Colorado State University and his MS in Forest Hydrology from the University of Minnesota. Thanks for joining us, Tom.
Thank you, Colby. Let's see. Tell me when the screen's up.
You're all set?
All right. Thanks, everyone, for hanging in there. This presentation represents a collaboration between KDHE and Johnson County, and true to the spirit of collaboration, most of this PowerPoint actually I stole from Johnson County and their consultant, HDR. For those not in the know, Johnson County is essentially a major part of our metro Kansas City portion on the Kansas side. Strong economic engine for the state, high level of growth, high level of standard of living, and a lot of economics flow from that. Some time ago, Johnson County has consolidated all their wastewater systems into a single utility served under the direction of the county. Serves over 400,000 residents, about 2/3 of the population in the county. It operates 6 treatment plants, going to 3 different drainages there, a lot of sewer lines, a lot of pump stations, a lot of assets out there that have a high dollar attached to it. If you were to try to replace, you're bumping into the billions of dollars. The impetus for integrated planning, and this is our second venture into it, this is our second integrated plans that we've seen in the state, Lawrence, Kansas being the first, but this one, the biggest one, came in the aftermath or as the county the utility had made the largest capital improvement project in county history with the ongoing replacement of their Tomahawk Creek wastewater treatment plant. $334 million, which is going to take them into the early part of this next decade. Regulatory drivers from our side, why we were pushing on them, what our demands were on them, are chiefly centered on the 3 wastewater treatment plants you see circled in the map here. Among those is the Nelson permit in the upper right corner there. It is basically had the longest administratively extended permit in the inventory for KDHE, almost bumping 15 years since we did our last permit with them. Hovered around objections EPA had regarding how the county was managing wet weather discharges there. Nelson and Mill Creek plants discharge into the Kansas River. Kansas River just in the last 2 years has had a TMDL put in place to look at reducing the phosphorus content of the river. And then we, again, had this newly issued permit for Tomahawk Creek, which dovetailed into their ongoing construction. And again, a large capital outlay from that. The other drivers that are out there, again, those wet weather discharges, and they've handled them in 4 different little drainages through what we call peak extraneous flow treatment facilities. And those independent little facilities that basically disinfected excessive wet weather flows and then consequently dechlorinated them and then released them into these small streams in the county during wet weather, was a real bone of contention with EPA and the focus of their objection over the Nelson permit. We've also adopted the ammonia criteria, the updated ammonia criteria. Nutrients are a big deal for us, and reducing those nutrients through our TMDL process and then implementing that through installation of biological nutrient removal. Those are all what are on our forefront in terms of pushing on the county. The county itself has its own customer base that has expectations as well. Aging infrastructure certainly is a big deal. You'll see the map in the upper right corner there that lays out the relative age of the sewer lines, et cetera. And that upper right portion of that map, where it's deepest red, basically represents the oldest part of the system. It also represents where most of the old money in the county lies, and so they certainly have an undue amount of influence in terms of how capital investment is made within the county as well, and how it impacts their respective neighborhoods. Where the management is a big deal for the county customer. It's not so much what's going down the creeks; it's what's backing up into their basements, and the county's been very vigilant trying to minimize those events. Resource recovery and waste acceptance, biosolids, fats, oils, grease, those are all of a sudden become a major management issue for the county. And then overall customer service, which is code for rates that are going to be paid by that customer base. Wastewater treatment needs and upgrades. We have the Tomahawk Creek for new 19 million gallons a day BNR facility. Nelson is an old trickling filter facility that is past due for serious upgrade and replacement as well. And then again, our Mill Creek regional plant, which has been a strong backbone of their wastewater treatment, but goes into the Kansas River, and it was our demands are on it to begin to reduce its phosphorus output as well. And you have issues surrounding the other three facilities as well, ranging in terms, a lot of it toward accommodating growth and dealing with wet weather. On this map, you have those PEFs, or those extraneous flow treatment facilities, all circled there in 4. And again, that farthest one to the right lies right in the middle of the oldest part of the county. It butts up against the Kansas City Country Club, where Tom Watson's a member, et cetera. And so there's quite a bit of social pressure associated with how these are going to be dealt with as well. But it overall basically, again, gets toward being able to manage growth and wet weather inside the county. Asset management is huge. The county is a leader in terms of being aggressive in taking on asset management and doing inspections and repair and replacement, and a strong program to clean out lines, et cetera. All again, with an eye toward maintaining the quality of life in the county and maintaining a tranquil customer base. Taking all toll, all those things, all those demands placed on the county, if they tally it up, it comes up to a bill of $3 billion, and nobody can cut a check like that. This was the impetus again for integrated planning to begin to say, how do we lay these out over time? And in that uppermost line, you see from KDHE's perspective, our number one objective was, how are they going to be able to upgrade to handle growth and handle nutrient output so that our TMDLs can begin to be achieved? This is the integrated plan. Again, the 6 elements that Robyn had described before. The notes on the right side are what's important. This is what the county was looking for, something that was somewhat balanced. It set priorities. It was affordable to their customer base, and therefore it's implementable. And I'll add one more to that. It gives them some certainty with all the changing regulations and demands being placed upon them through NPDES, et cetera. This begins to give them a blueprint and a path for carrying out the projects that are necessary to meet our demands, as well as those that are of internal concern to them. HDR and the county went through a process to essentially score and code up various projects and their relative impacts on three very important attributes. Environmental, which again, that's KDHE's bailiwick and where we're concerned, but for them as well, it was customer service, and then community enhancement, building up quality of life and maintaining a high quality of life as well. And with various criteria associated with that, scoring each of the projects that they had on on their to-do list and scoring that out, and then breaking it out in rough thirds in terms of what projects are rising to the top in terms of priority, and begin to use those to guide their overall capital improvement planning. That in turn, look with an eye toward a 25-year horizon. They're looking at $2 billion in 2018 $2 billion to accomplish all those projects that are set priority across that 25-year horizon. Probably 3/4 of those are associated with upgrades and replacement of the treatment plants, sewer lines, and the pump stations. Again, nutrient reduction, wet weather management, and being able to accommodate the growth there. And then breaking that out across a 5-year increments across that 25-year horizon. Similarly, going hand in hand with the cost breakout is just the schedule and time. And if you look at the upper rows there, those are the things that are key toward KDHE's concerns in terms of the plant upgrades and expansions to deal with that. In the lower part is things that are probably more important from EPA, and again, addressing their original objections on that, on what to do with those PEFs. And there's an interim plan to upgrade the PEFs to do a better job in terms of disinfection and then consequently dechlorination. But then as you get toward the latter part, you start seeing the county making its plans to eliminate those, which would have appeased the concerns of EPA. If you come across that, you'll see that 3 of the 4 PEFs are scheduled to be eliminated, but by 2044, which means that after the 25-year horizon, there's still work to be done. And so there's going to be significant needs anticipated out beyond that in terms of rehabilitation and replacement, but also that consideration of that last PEF to be eliminated as well, which also is, again, is centered in that oldest part of the county, and looking at trade-offs between replacing it versus how much disruption that has in the character of the neighborhoods there versus other ways to deal with that. And then, of course, expansions in the past 25 years from now. Then to make it work, what the real work is to take that first 5-year portion of the plan and say, this is what we're accomplishing, our schedule of projects, and what we're going to work on over the next 5 years between this year, 2020, up through 2024, in terms with a completion of the Tomahawk Creek plant, begin the construction at the Nelson complex, and then carry out other wet weather studies and the Mill Creek planning study on how it can best and be optimized and reinvested for nutrient reduction relative to that, as well as all the other asset management issues and pump station replacements and so forth, and upgrades on those PEFs carried out over these first 5 years. So here's the tail of the tape from our side. We implemented their integrated plan through a similar iterative consent order, and then the subsequent NPDES permits would then carry out that specific 5-year implementation, driven and directed by the plan and codified by the consent order. EPA held a hearing on the Nelson permit and found that using the integrated plan and carrying it out would adequately address their original objections to that. It cleared the path for us to begin to put that permit together and put it out for public notice. We take the integrated plan and codify it again with a consent order, a voluntary agreement on where we're going to go. We executed that in the fall in October. It addresses, again, it's very comprehensive, addresses all the wastewater collection and treatment systems issues and projects that they're going to do. And the consent order requires the county to implement the first 5 years of the plan. Nutrient reduction part of that, the PEF upgrades and interim improvements leading ultimately toward their ultimate elimination. And then the consent order expects the integrated plan to be revisited and updated for the next 5 years at the end of 2024. And concurrently, the consent order will be amended at that time as well to basically take another 5-year view of that, and then the subsequent permits implement the consent order relative to that. We currently have the Nelson and Mill Creek permits out right now for public notice until this Saturday. We've received no comments on it. We're seeing a clear path to basically get the county back on the right side of the backlog issue. The permits are going to incorporate the integrated plan and consent order within their respective schedules of compliance. And those initial activities, again, will center around the construction at Tomahawk, studies at Mill Creek, and studies at Nelson, as well as construction, and then pump station upgrades and sewer line rehab. So, are we fans? You betcha. Our perspectives on this is that it has given us a path to be able to dialogue with our municipalities who have a lot of demands being thrown at them from a variety of directions there. It allows the community to sequentially schedule out these large capital improvement projects. For us, it's for wastewater treatment. It expands the horizon, the end point, out beyond the typical 5-year term of the permits, and we utilize the consent orders to allow that continuation down the calendar to continue. For the county, it's creating regulatory certainty and commitment while they commit to these are the things that are going to happen over the next 25 years. That commitment then allows us to understand where our respective expectations, like when meeting the final permit limits or the waste load allocations in our TMDLs, when we expect that to occur. Because of the 5-year revisit and updating, it invokes an adaptive management philosophy to recognize that potentially issues come up, priorities change, etc. For the customer base, this allows them to spread out the costs on a somewhat annualized basis so that the rate increases are incremental and gradual as opposed to a large sticker shock. Ultimately, for any utility out there and the cities that are running these utilities, the demands just keep coming. Stormwater management through the MS4, combined sewer overflows, who frankly laid the groundwork for integrated planning with their long-term control plans. Safe Drinking Water Act requirements are coming in hot and heavy, and they're ruthless. They take no prisoners relative to that. They don't care the size of the community. They just say, this is what has to happen to provide safe drinking water out of the water taps of your citizens there. That's got a price tag attached to it as well. And then ultimately, if you start looking at beyond just the administrative boundaries of our communities, so looking at things on a watershed scale, how the regulated community can work with the non-regulated community and the non-point sources for supporting things out in the watershed for BMP implementation for environmental improvement, which also opens the door to some possibilities for like water quality trading. From us, the only drawback is we have to be patient. We have to recognize we're not going to get what we want in the next 5 years. It's going to be out there a ways, and we just have to play for time and play the long game on this as well. For the county or any regulated community, probably the drawback to this, and we have had a few communities say thanks but no thanks on it, it's their reluctance to commit future city councils, successive staffs, and the next generation to commitments being made right now and that expand across once they're gone. Those commitments are still in place. There's still some reluctance to take that on right now as well. But we offer it when we have communities that have got a lot of balls in the air relative to that as a way to begin to chart a path for what they need to accomplish under NPDS. And we think it's been a very viable tool for us to implement our TMDLs and push our permits into the next level of environmental advocacy and improvement. So with that, I believe, yep, that is the Kansas story. Colby?
Great. Thank you, Tom. And thank you to all of our presenters today. This is a reminder that if you'd like to send in a question, please use the questions box in your control panel. And please feel free to direct your question towards a specific speaker. We have some questions that have come in. First off, I'm going to direct this question to Robyn. An audience member asked, can you speak on how integrated planning can be promoted as a resiliency tool?
Great, thank you, Colby. And this is an excellent question. You know, with the changing climate, we've heard from other communities who want to plan for the future so that their water infrastructure can be resilient and be able to work well even in the face of extreme weather events. You know, there's droughts or increased precipitation that we've seen occurring in the past years, and what integrated planning does is it helps you plan for the future. So it's something that you can look at not just 5 years out, but 10 or 15 years out, and think about how you can use stormwater and wastewater infrastructure as a way to make sure that they can continue to provide clean water and a healthy environment. And so one way to think about this is to look at green infrastructure and use green infrastructure as a way to provide additional flexibility in addressing those uncertainties. And the other nice thing about green infrastructure is you can include it incrementally and relatively rapidly and expand and adapt as necessary. So that's one way to include green infrastructure in your integrated planning if your community is interested in being more resilient.
Great, thank you, Robyn. The next question is for Grace. Someone wanted to know about clarification for what is and what isn't green infrastructure. Specifically, for example, are hydrodynamic separators or detention systems considered green infrastructure?
Okay, thank you, Colby. No, we don't consider holding structures to be green. We really want to see some infiltration, and we go by two standards. One is the Blue Book of Virginia, and the other is the Bay Protocols. That's what we follow.
Great, thank you, Grace. The next question is for Tom. An audience member asked, has hazard mitigation planning been integrated into the plans that you discussed?
Indirectly with the asset management, which is essentially preventive maintenance and looking at that. And having said that, we know, like, as aggressive as their asset management activities have been, this last spring when we had major rainfall, major flooding, we had bypasses all over the place, and they basically scrambled to do that. But that all mitigation is best handled at the local level. They galvanize their staff to deal with come what may and all that, and then they just have to adhere to the requirements and their permits, et cetera, to keep us abreast of what's going on relative to that. Our end game, the things that we are doing aren't really all that mission critical. I mean, it is playing investments for next generation environmental improvement. So mitigation is probably less in our lexicon than it is with them, where they're doing day-by-day operations.
Great, thank you, Tom. The next audience question is more of a general question, and feel free to chime in if you have a response to this one. For either of both speakers, what were the costs and staff time commitment associated with the integrated planning effort itself?
I can answer some of that. We have spent probably, since 2013, probably $2.5 million on the planning part of this. And staff time, I would say half of a full-time equivalent.
from the state side, I'd say we dedicated a portion of probably 4 to 5 different staff members to help manage that, starting with just the permit writer himself. We incorporated the advice and counsel from our TMDL people, the people that had to manage the legalities of making this happen with the consent order. Took a bit of time, and it took we basically put leadership on it as well to show that this was a high-profile project that was important to KDHE. That we wanted to see it come to fruition. As we get better and better experience with it, I think those numbers will drop. But for the initial investment we made in staff time, it was well worth it. It solved our 15-year problem with the Nelson permit. It, in fact, implements our TMDLs with a horizon well beyond the next 5 years, but nonetheless, we know when to expect those investments made. So it was time well spent, but early on, it was quite a bit of staff time interacting with the council, the county, and their consultant in understanding where they were coming from and them understanding where our pressure points were.
Great. Thank you, Grace and Tom. And the next question is for Grace. An audience member asked, does Richmond have any goals for impervious surface reduction? And if so, what are the practices that you use?
We don't have a goal per se for impervious reduction. We do encourage it, and we give credit for it to reduce your stormwater utility fee. That is one of the practices that we encourage, but it did not become part of the goal for this project.
Great. Thank you, Grace. Another audience member asked, will the slides be available for downloading? I just sent a link to the entire audience via the chat box, where you will find the recorded webinar and slides in a couple weeks' time. Next question I have from an audience member, again for Grace. Why was the Reedy Creek restoration opposed?
Damned if I know. Actually, their stated reasons were, first it was we were removing trees, even though we could prove that 40% of them were non-natives. The second one was we were destroying habitat that would never recover from a stream restoration. And 3 was it was an historic stream bed, that there was at one point a mill there that was historic, and it was the reason that neighborhood was there. They never had any data to support this, but they had a lot of emotional people who would show up at city council meetings wearing Save Reedy Creek t-shirts.
Great. Thank you, Grace. The next question is for Robyn. An audience member asked, you mentioned that the EPA has initiated an outreach effort to inform permittees of integrated planning in accordance with the CWA. Is there an expectation that delegated states also do the same outreach? And if so, is there associated guidance?
Hi, Colby. Thanks for the question. So yes, in the WIIA legislation and now under the Clean Water Act, it's Section 402S. 2, it does say that the administrator or a state, in the case of a permit program approved by the administrator, shall inform municipalities of the opportunity to develop an integrated plan that may be incorporated into a permit under this section. And so we are doing outreach, and we've asked all of the regions to talk to the states that are MPDES permitting authorities to then in turn reach out to their municipalities. So there's a range of options that states could do this. You could simply send an email to the people that you know. You could go big and do a in-person conference like Ohio EPA did last year. We attended that in October, where 80 people showed up and they discussed the different ways that they've already done some integrated planning. Or you could do something in the middle. It's really up to the state how they want to reach out to their municipality, but they can choose depending on their resources and what they want to convey. And so we have this memo that can be submitted as an attachment into an email or discussed from December 3rd that goes over the integrated planning and what's in the Water Infrastructure and Improvement Act. So that's one thing that they could do. We don't currently have any guidance right now. We don't want to be prescriptive about how to go about that. We want to make it open, but when our municipal ombudsman comes on board, hopefully in the next month or so, that could be a good opportunity to make sure things are being done consistently across the nation.
Great, thank you, Robyn. The next question we have is for Tom. An audience member asked, did the county have a plan for community involvement beyond what the regulatory agencies provided? And if so, how was the public involved?
Yeah, they've scheduled a number of outreach activities and open houses for the citizens to come in and understand where the county is coming from and laying out the early versions of what the long-term plan was as well as open forums during the county commission meetings and work sessions with the county commissioners working through that. So they had a fairly robust engagement with their respective public that we had no part of. I mean, our public engagement was basically settled down to the EPA hearing and then their ongoing public notice that we have on those two permits. So the county demonstrated a lot of outreach, which is pretty par for the course for them. They've got a very sophisticated citizen base that understands these issues and is more than willing to express opinions on the direction Johnson County Wastewater is going on their affairs.
Thank you, Tom. Another audience question. This one is for Robyn. An audience member asked if you could give an update when the EPA will release the financial capability analysis methodology.
Thanks, Colby, for the question. I have a room of experts here at EPA that have been working on it, and unfortunately we don't have timing yet to announce when that will be released, but as soon as we know, we'll let people know when that's possible.
Great. Thank you, Robyn, and thank you for all of the questions, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Unfortunately, we don't have time, so if we didn't get to your question, we apologize. Again, if you need the recording, please view the link that I sent via the chat box, and have a great day.